What's the most eerie thing that's ever happened to you? Story 1, I was driving home per usual and got this random, unwavering feeling that my house had been broken into. I kind of laughed and said, please do not let my house have actually been broken into out loud as I turned the corner onto my street. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up to the house were the blinds on my bedroom window. They were yanked around and twisted up. Some guy that lives across the street turned out to have been stalking me and decided to climb through my bedroom window. He took nothing valuable, just some weird personal items. It was terrifying to walk in and see my things rummaged through. It was even scarier when I talked to the neighbor, and they admitted that multiple people in the neighborhood had seen it happen, but they were all too scared of the guy to say anything. The weirdest part of it all, and I mean this guy took some really creepy personal things, is that nagging feeling I had before I found the remnants of the break-in. I swear I knew before I knew, and that was such an eerie feeling. Story 2, I am a medic and firefighter. We once had a call for something normal, like chest pain or something similar. I cannot remember exactly. The caller said he was in his barn or garage, which is not really weird around here. Anyway, we pulled up on scene and something just felt off. I have no idea why, but something in my gut told me that something was wrong. I decided to do a 360-degree walk around the building before we went through the door at the front, which was clearly the main entrance. I walked around and came to a window on the side of the building and looked inside. There was a shotgun rigged to the door. The guy had set a trap for us, and he had taken his own life as well. We kicked in this plexiglass-type material on the side of the building and entered that way. The guy was dead, and there was nothing we could do about it at that point. I would have been the first one through that door. I have no idea why I did not just walk through it that day. Story 3. Sleep paralysis. I have had 2 episodes in my life, but the first one will stick with me forever. My bed was in a corner of my room, and my closet was in the opposite corner. There was no door in the closet, and it was stacked with a ton of junk, basically community storage for the household since I never used it. I woke up lying on my back, with the closet in my line of sight. I could see that it was full, but I could also see a hand slide out and grip the doorframe. It was pale and feminine, followed by the slowly emerging frame of a very tall woman, clad in a white, Victorian-era dress. She was almost pretty, aside from something in her face that was not quite right. I could not tell you what it was, but I remember feeling uneasy about it. For a while, probably about 15 minutes, she just stood there talking to herself. I was not able to make out anything she said, but that was when the panic set in. I realized I could not move or speak, could not look away, and had no idea what was happening, even though I felt fully awake. Then she stopped, looked me in the eye and smiled, and the corners of her mouth pulled back toward her ears. It was terrifying. She started to approach and slowly opened her mouth so wide that her chin was touching where I would estimate the bottom of her ribcage sat. It was not long before I could smell her rotten breath, and she began to crawl on top of me. The entire time she was letting out this awful, multi-tone moan that sounded like 5 voices at once, all distorted. I could feel her weight resting on my chest, and I could not breathe or scream as she inched closer. She put my entire head in her mouth, and I fully woke up when all I could see was darkness. I still get a bit panicky remembering that one, because it felt so real. Story 4. My ex and I lived in a remote part of northern Nevada. The house was literally in the middle of a field, and our neighbors were far away. He worked nights, and I never liked how dark and quiet it was. On a night when he was working, I fell asleep and had a dream about him. In the dream, he was standing on the edge of a cliff, like the Grand Canyon, looking out at the view. I tried many times to get his attention, but he would not acknowledge me and just kept staring straight ahead. After ignoring me for a while, he abruptly turned to me and grabbed the outside of my arms firmly. His face looked panicked, and he said my name and told me there was somebody in the house. Like something out of a movie, my eyes shot open, and I woke up with my blood running cold. I lay in bed silently, listening for any sound. I was even more terrified when the dog woke up almost immediately, started barking, and ran out through his dog door into the yard. I kept wondering what he had heard. I never saw or heard anything out of place, and I could not see anything outside in the dark. The dog eventually came back in and fell asleep, but I stayed up the rest of the night, completely creeped out. Story 5. I went to Tajikistan in the year 2019 to meet my new colleagues and learn the area I was going to be working in. I was greeted by my employer and a few of my new colleagues at the airport, and they took me to an apartment complex where everyone was housed. Every building was dull and dusty on the outside. Upon entering, I could see hallways with tile flooring and metal staircases leading to each apartment. The apartments had heavy metal doors. I could not decide if I felt safe because everything looked secure or uneasy because why did everything need to be so secure? We walked up to the third floor and entered the door on that landing. As I walked in, I was shocked. The floor was covered in immaculately detailed rugs, beautiful wallpaper covered in sparkling gold, plum and emerald-colored designs, massive crystal chandeliers, and beautiful antique furniture. It felt like I had just walked into an underground palace. There were two women who took my things, showed me to my room, and offered me tea, cake, and a variety of snacks. Everyone was so kind and welcoming. It was around 6 in the evening, and the women had prepared dinner for everyone. I was the only female in the group of colleagues. We were ushered into the dining room, which had a long table close to the floor and was surrounded by big, beautiful floor pillows. We ate, laughed, and had good conversation. When it was time for bed, one of the ladies brought towels and toiletries to my room and let me get settled in. She told me to lock my door, which I would have done regardless. The doors to the rooms were also heavy metal doors with large sliding locks on them. After I freshened up, I got into my pajamas and into bed to call my husband. We talked for about an hour before I started falling asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night with my phone still in my hand. I could hear someone singing. I did not understand the words, but it sounded sad and made my hair stand up on end. It sounded far away. I got out of bed to look out the window. In the distance was a mountain range with faint lighting behind it, as if the moon was setting behind it. The singing was coming from the mountains. It was both beautiful and eerily terrifying. I lost track of time and was not even sure how long I was standing at the window. I asked about it the next morning at breakfast, and everyone just kind of looked at each other. They never gave me an explanation. They just said that some things there are ancient. I will never forget that experience. Story 6. When I was 13 to 14 years old, some older boys threw rocks from a demolition site at me and my friend. One rock hit me in the face and knocked me down. I started bleeding profusely on the sidewalk, and my friend was panicking. We did not have cell phones since it was the 1990s, and we were not near a payphone. An older man in his 50s or 60s stopped in a pickup truck and asked us to get in. My friend was clearly terrified, but I said no, let us get in. It is fine. This older man felt really trustworthy, even though I did not know why. My friend got in with me, and he drove us straight to the hospital. When we arrived, the hospital took his name, my friend's name, and mine when we were brought into the emergency room, and then the man left. I had problems from the injury for about 2 to 3 years, but I am fine now, other than a small dent in my skull. My mom later told me that I should look him up in the phone book and call to thank him. There was exactly one name that matched his, and it was an unusual name. I called it, and the woman who answered told me that he had died 6 months earlier, but his physical description matched what both my friend and I remembered. I was able to look up his obituary, and the photo matched his appearance. It was definitely eerie, and to this day I still do not really have any explanation for it. Story 7. Years ago, I worked the late shift at a hospital from 4 in the afternoon until midnight. My nightly drive home led me through back roads of fields and woods, which often had low-hanging fog, particularly in early spring. I lived in a small town that had a lot of Civil War history, and ghost stories were so popular that area historians would do moonlight ghost walks, where they searched for signs of restless spirits roaming the battlefield. The urban legend was that in a war that pitted brother against brother, those soldiers who were killed by family became souls that were never at rest. I never really bought into it, but one night under particularly dense fog scared the life out of me. At around 1 in the morning, as I sped through curves and hills, I saw the outline of 2 figures walking along the side of the road. The closer I got, the more I slowed down because I did not want to hit them or anything. By the time I passed them, I was going probably 10 miles per hour. First, I noticed their weirdly shaped hats. Then the buttons on their jackets glimmered in my headlights. I swear there were two Civil War soldiers walking in the fog in the moonlight, and I could not breathe. The taller one, thin and gangly, looked up at my car and put his hand out toward me. I hit the gas so hard my transmission could barely keep up. I sped off into the night, and when I finally caught my breath, yelled several choice words. As I rounded another curve, I saw a small car, a Geo Metro, pulled over with its lights flashing. The hood was up and steam was coming from the engine. A man in Civil War clothing stood nearby staring at it with his hands on his hips. It turned out that reenactors were in town for some event and had car trouble. To this day, I have no idea why they were out so late, but it nearly scared me to death. Story 8. I was a manager of computer repair for a retailer a couple of years ago. We had a client's computer in the back running various malware and virus scans, and I was doing morning paperwork nearby. This computer had its screensaver on, displaying random photos from the My Pictures folder, various family members, children's birthday parties, the usual stuff. Then out of the corner of my eye, I swear I saw a picture of a woman from the shoulders up with her throat cut. As soon as I realized what I thought I was seeing, I focused fully on the screen, and it had already switched back to photos of a car show. As the day went on, I tried not to think about it and continued my work, until I brought another customer's computer into the back to work on it. Again, from my peripheral vision, I could have sworn I saw a bloody body bound in the trunk of a car. That was when I really started to panic. I grabbed one of my employees and explained the situation. We then sat for about 10 minutes and watched the screensaver, since it was against company policy to search through a client's personal files without clear cause. During that time, we saw a photo of two bodies in a shallow grave in the woods and another photo of a severed hand inside a kitchen drawer. I then went and got the general manager and informed him of what we had seen, and he also watched the screensaver. We felt it would be in everyone's best interest to contact law enforcement. About 15 minutes later, the owner of the computer arrived with another man. I told him his computer was not ready and that it would take a while. He then informed me that he had been called because someone reported that there were photographs of a gruesome crime found on his computer. I showed him the screen, and his partner immediately started laughing. Apparently, he worked in law enforcement, had taken some of his work home against policy, and never realized that his work photos were being used as a screensaver. Story 9. I have quite a few stories like this, but one of the ones from my childhood happened one night when I had to be somewhere between 12 and 15 years old and was home alone. I was playing on the computer in our den, and directly across from it was the door that led up to the pantry, which had a set of stairs going up to the attic. Suddenly, I heard a loud thump, followed by repeated thumps, as if something had fallen down the stairs. My heart stopped because there was a door at the top of the stairs that should not have allowed anything to fall down. I remember getting up and walking over to the door, but being completely unable to touch the knob. Then I heard the sound of pacing coming from above me. Slowly walking backward, I returned to the den and curled up in a ball on the couch, staring at that door as the sound of another thump, followed by something moving down the stairs, happened again. This continued for hours, until shortly before my parents got home, when it suddenly stopped and never happened again. My dad went up after they got home and confirmed that nothing had been moved or disturbed, but after that night, I hated being alone at night. This was also the same house where I would not shower if nobody was home. It was all just a bit unsettling, and the house we moved into after that one was even worse. Story 10. This one is kind of weird, but there is no ghost stuff involved. One time I was home alone after school, lying in bed trying to take a nap, even though I was 110% awake the entire time, since I had only laid down about 2 minutes earlier, and I normally take forever to fall asleep. Suddenly there was this massive rumbling that shook my entire house, kind of like thunder, but much lower in pitch. It must have gone on for at least 15 seconds, because I had enough time to think that it was lasting a long time, get up, walk over, and open my window before it stopped. So it clearly was not a dream. I looked in the direction it came from, and on the horizon, which would have been about 20 miles away if I had to guess, there was a massive, rounded, dark cloud cresting the horizon that looked like the top of a mushroom cloud, with the stem hidden beyond the horizon. It was almost, but not quite, chilly outside since it was the very beginning of fall, with absolutely no wind and incredibly clear skies. And as I spent around 20 to 30 seconds staring at that cloud, there was suddenly a massive gust of very hot wind that lasted about 15 seconds, strong enough to knock over trash cans. I was still pretty young, and my mom worked at the hospital, so I tried to call her, but for about 30 minutes, I only got an automated message saying the phones were not working. When I finally got through, I explained everything and asked her if she had heard anything about it, but she had no idea what I was talking about. In the end, I spent about half an hour thinking that there might have been some kind of massive explosion in New England. And since this was only a couple of years after 9/11, that was not an entirely unreasonable fear. To this day, it almost feels like I was somehow dropped into an almost identical reality where nothing ever happened right when that shockwave hit. Story 11. A group of 5 girls, all about 12 years old, were staying at a friend's house for a sleepover in the year 1995. She lived in a rural area, and the closest neighbor was about half a mile away. Her dad had built a fort out of an old ship in the backyard, not far from the house. The cabin of the ship was not the original cabin, but a basic wooden shack roughly 10 by 10 feet, made from thick wooden planks with a tin roof. And it was only about 4 feet tall inside, so you could only sit. It sat on top of 4 pillars, about 5 to 6 feet off the ground. There were 2 doors that swung freely and sat opposite from each other, one attached to a plank from the rest of the ship, and the other opening to a pole that you could slide down to exit. There was also about a 1-foot gap in the wood all around the perimeter between the walls and the roof that served as a sort of window. We were inside around 9 in the evening telling ghost stories, holding flashlights to our faces and laughing. The dad and his friend came out once to scare us and again to tell us to quiet down, and we were having a great time. Then in the middle of one of the stories, we felt what seemed like something heavy slam into the bottom of the cabin. Shocked, we laughed it off and assumed it was the dad and his friend messing with us again. Then something landed on the tin roof, and since they had peacocks as pets that were known to jump on roofs, I immediately thought it was one of the birds. Suddenly, the whole cabin started shaking, not violently at first, but enough for us to feel it move. Then a hard object began hitting the sides in random places and scraping along the walls like someone dragging a heavy tool along a fence. Out of nowhere, the door that opened to the pole exit was hit hard and flew open, with nothing behind it. After a few seconds of silence, everything started happening at once. Thuds on the roof, banging and scraping on the walls, the shaking becoming violent, and that same door being repeatedly hit open. Candy, the strongest and bravest girl in the group, who had even won the school arm wrestling contest against all the boys, jumped in front of the door to keep it closed. The door was being hit so hard that even with all her weight and effort, she was being pushed forward. And although it was no longer flying open, it was still opening a few inches at a time. I will never forget the look of pure terror on her face. Needless to say, we were screaming, especially one girl in particular. While all of this was happening, I worked up enough courage to try to look through the gap near the roof by getting up on my knees. But I could not see anything without sticking my head out, which I refused to do. I listened as hard as I could for any sign of a person, a laugh, a voice, breathing, footsteps, anything, but I heard nothing. Then we heard a gunshot from a short distance away, and everything stopped instantly. It was the dad. He pulled us all out of the cabin and locked us in their large pantry. After the property was searched, we were let out, and they found nothing. We were told to wait until morning to see any damage. The next morning, we went back out with the dad and his friend, and we all climbed into the cabin so the 2 men could try to recreate the shaking, but they could barely move it. I walked around the outside and saw scratches on the wooden planks, but nothing else. The only other thing found was half of an amethyst geode. That was it. The door that had been repeatedly hit open had no marks on it at all. I only wish I had more time to investigate before we were taken back inside. I stayed friends only with the one girl who had been screaming, and as adults, we still agree on what happened that night. I wish I could find the other girls, Candy, Joy, and Sarah, to hear what they remember. Story 12. I had a full-blown premonition once. A friend of mine was getting married in a few months, and I was part of the wedding party, so we had been loosely planning the bachelor party without getting into any real details. One night, about 3 months before the wedding, I had an extremely intense dream. In the dream, I was sitting in a restaurant at a table with all the guys, and when I looked to my left, I saw a large window on the far wall with rain falling outside. Then I felt my pocket vibrate and reached down to see a text message. It was a photo taken from directly behind me, so I could see the back of my own head and everyone else sitting at the table. I turned around, but nobody was there, and the whole thing felt strangely sinister. I woke up completely exhausted, drenched in sweat, with a buzzing sound in my ears, and I had to sit there with my head in my hands because it felt like my brain was spinning. I told my wife about it, and she just brushed it off as weird. A few months later, it was finally time for the bachelor party, and we were sitting at a table in a restaurant I had never been to before. I looked to my left, and on the far wall was a large window and it was raining outside. The sense of familiarity hit me immediately. My friend's brother was sitting across from me, reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, smirked, and showed me the screen. It was a picture of the back of my head and all of us sitting at the table. I spun around and saw my friend's sister sitting a few tables away, and she had sent the picture as a joke. She and her family had no idea we were going to be there that morning. At that point, I was genuinely shaken, because the only differences were that it was not my phone receiving the message, and it was my friend's sister who took the photo, not something unknown or supernatural. It felt far too specific to be a coincidence, and it still unsettles me to this day. Story 13. One of my favorite aunts died at the age of 94, leaving my elderly dad a much-needed sum of money for his care. He had recently been tricked out of his entire savings with empty promises and left in deep debt by a man from a neighboring county, and I was working with the district attorney from about 1,200 miles away to build a case against him, all of which was unknown to my aunt at the time of her death. By then, I had power of attorney for my dad and went to the bank on a Saturday morning to collect the inheritance check. The bank manager and I were the only people there, so she directed me to the only desk in the lobby instead of her office. After I shared the circumstances that had brought me there, and we finalized the paperwork, she left to process a cashier's check in another area. Before putting my aunt's death certificate away, I placed my palm on it and whispered a prayer of gratitude to her for generously providing for my dad. At that exact moment, out of the corner of my left eye, I saw movement. A coin was rolling across the carpeted floor and spun to a stop about 4 feet to my direct left. Stunned, I stood up and picked it up, looking around for where it could have come from. It had rolled from the direction of a floor to ceiling lobby window that was brightly lit by the sun. There was no one around, inside or outside, and I immediately had goosebumps. When the manager returned, I told her what had happened, showed her the penny, and asked if she had any possible explanation. She told me that no loose change was kept in that area of the bank, that it had been cleaned the night before, and that I was the only customer there so far that day. Half joking, I said that it must have been my aunt letting me know everything was going to be okay, and the manager walked around the desk and gave me a heartfelt hug. The man who had conned my dad was eventually convicted of fraud and elder abuse and sent to prison with the maximum sentence. I was able to make sure my dad was debt-free, comfortable, cared for, and safe until his peaceful passing. I still carry that penny with me to this day. Story 14. The day after my dad died, I laid down and took a long nap. I was exhausted from the visitors, the questions, and the constant reminders that he was gone, and I just wanted to escape for a while. During that nap, I had a strange dream. I was back in the hospital and saw my dad surrounded by doctors, hooked up to all kinds of wires and intravenous lines. I cried and begged them to leave him alone, telling them he had suffered enough, but my dad told me not to cry. And that was when I realized they were actually removing the wires and tubes from him. He stood up, something he had not been able to do in a long time, and asked me to walk with him. He was wearing a long white robe, and together we walked through a beautiful place beside a stream. I was telling him about how we had recently seen the Avengers movie, and how his favorite superhero, the Hulk, was in it. I laughed while describing the scene where the Hulk slams Loki around like a rag doll, and said that it would have been his favorite part, and that he would have died laughing. My dad smiled and said that was a poor choice of words, and I immediately apologized. His smile faded, and he looked at me seriously and said that it was all right, but that he had not really wanted to die. Then I woke up with tears streaming down my face. To this day, I have never had another dream like that. I have always been skeptical of the unknown, but sometimes I wonder if he was saying goodbye to me in the only way he could. I still miss him every single day of my life, and if I could have just one more dream with him, I would be unbelievably happy. Story 15. A few years ago, I was on holiday in Malta with my family. My parents are Maltese, and I have a lot of cousins and extended family who live there. One of my cousins' fathers had passed away a few years before this, and I had known him fairly well. On this particular day, while we were walking just outside the walls of Valletta, my wife and I mentioned that we needed to look for a safe place to cross the road. We were walking normally and were not standing near the edge or signaling in any way that we planned to cross. Suddenly, a Mini Cooper appeared seemingly out of nowhere, slammed to a stop right next to me, and the driver leaned over and told me not to cross the road there because it was too dangerous, pointing instead to a specific spot where I should cross. Then he drove off. The driver was an exact match to my cousin's father, wearing the same kind of clothes he always used to wear, shorts and a white sleeveless shirt, and driving the exact same car in the same color that he had owned when he was alive. What makes it even stranger is that he spoke to me in English, when Maltese would have been the obvious choice, as if he somehow knew I spoke English, even though there was nothing about me that would have marked me as a foreigner. I cannot explain how he knew I was planning to cross the road, but I am convinced that he appeared in that moment to save me from being hit by a car. Story 16. This happened when I was quite young, probably from around the age of 7 until about 13. I would regularly hear footsteps running back and forth up and down the hallway at certain times during the night, and while it was unnerving, I did not feel threatened by it, if that makes sense. I eventually got used to it, but then something changed. If I was sitting alone in the living room, usually during the daytime, I would hear footsteps again, but this time they were much slower, and I would feel something watching me from the doorway. I would look back over the sofa and just know something was there, like it was checking on me. Strangely, I did not feel scared. It actually felt comforting in a weird way, and this continued for several years whenever I was alone in the living room relaxing. Another incident happened when I was around 15 years old. It was the middle of June, and I had my nightlight on. It was around 10 in the evening. My bed was in the middle of the room, a little away from my bedroom door, which was always left slightly open with the hallway light on. At first I thought I was experiencing sleep paralysis, but I could still move, and I suddenly heard something whispering loudly right next to my ear, repeatedly saying my name. It did not stop and felt like it was pressed right against my left ear, speaking in a deep voice. I was genuinely terrified because I had no idea what it was, and I remember covering my ears, but it became so loud that I started screaming hysterically for my mother. I have never felt fear like that before or since. After that, it continued for the next 2 years, first in my bedroom and then around the house. I would lock myself in the bathroom, the only room with a lock, waiting for my mother to come home from work because I could hear it in the other rooms. I would put earphones in, which muffled it slightly, and eventually it seemed to follow me outside the house to some extent. Over time, it became more like mumbling rather than clearly saying my name. I was struggling with my mental health during that period, and it was eventually explained as auditory and visual hallucinations, especially since I also saw black blurs darting across the house back then. While I felt some comfort knowing it was supposedly in my head, to this day I still question what it actually was. Story 17. I worked at a nuclear weapons storage depot in the Nevada desert outside Nellis Air Force Base for 6 years, and it has since been shut down. When people say unidentified flying objects are attracted to nuclear sites, they are telling the truth, but there was far more going on than that. On my first night there, I witnessed a ball of light trigger sensors along the fence line, prompting a security response. The ball was chased by 3 patrols as it moved directly above the fence before suddenly making a sharp turn out into the desert. Over the span of 2 weeks, we discovered 3 mutilated donkeys, each about a mile apart, seemingly dropped there with no tracks leading in or out. Various organs had been removed. There was no blood anywhere, no tearing of flesh, only clean cuts, and scavengers did not touch the bodies. I also witnessed a figure standing on top of a structure roof about 30 meters from me and 14 other personnel just watching us. I shined a spotlight on it, and the moment the light hit the figure, it vanished, and all of us saw it happen. Another time, I heard a man laughing maniacally, but there was nothing there. A sweep using night vision and thermal equipment revealed nothing, even though 3 other people heard it as well. We brushed it off as the laughing colonel, an urban legend passed down among security personnel. While on patrol in an adjoining conventional weapons storage area, my partner and I parked near a loading pad holding 500-pound bombs that were about to be shipped overseas. We heard a soft cooing sound coming from the pad. We conducted a security sweep, but the sound continued and seemed to lure us past the pad and into the pitch-black desert. Night vision and thermal scans showed nothing, and we chose not to pursue it, completing another sweep before moving on. During a training exercise, our machine gun overwatch team spotted 2 figures on thermal imaging in the desert behind us. The exercise was immediately canceled when command confirmed no opposing forces had been placed there. Everyone prepared for contact and conducted a sweep, and the overwatch team saw the figures drop prone and back away from us before disappearing as we approached. Thermal imaging confirmed trace heat on the ground, even though we never visually saw anything. The strangest incident happened while I was on exterior patrol outside the fence line. I was called to respond to a truck approaching along a nearby mountain, which was not unusual since people often wandered into the area unknowingly. I visually confirmed the truck with night vision, and suddenly the headlights disappeared. We assumed they had turned them off and were approaching on foot, so I called for a K-9 unit and moved to a blocking position where anyone would have to pass to reach the perimeter. After about 10 minutes, patrol units positioned at higher points inside the fence reported lights appearing at our 12, 3, and 9 o'clock positions, effectively surrounding us, with the fence line roughly 300 meters behind us. We saw and heard nothing, even with night vision, thermal imaging, and the dogs showed no reaction. Then panicked calls came in saying the lights were rushing us. We were already prepared, and I told my partner to ready a grenade. Nothing happened, the dog never indicated, and our radios suddenly stopped working. After hiking back to the fence line, we discovered we had been out of contact for nearly twice as long as we thought, and our radios only began working again once we reached the perimeter. There are more incidents, but these are the main ones I'm allowed to talk about. The world is not as normal as most people believe. Story 18. One time I was camping with an ex, and we had taken a large amount of LSD. We were listening to music and enjoying the experience in the tent when I started seeing flashes of light. At first I assumed it was other campers shining flashlights around, but it kept happening, and then we finally heard a distant, ominous boom. I looked outside and saw that one side of the sky was a clear, starry night, while the other side was a massive black storm cloud with an enormous amount of lightning ripping through it. We scrambled to get everything out of the tent and into the car. I remember picking up armfuls of gear that felt like it was melting into my arms because I was so out of it. We ended up leaving the tent behind because we could not figure out how to take it down, and we huddled inside the car as the storm closed in on us. It was by far the craziest electrical storm I have ever seen, and not just because of the state I was in. There was at least one lightning strike every second, sometimes more, and it went on for about 8 hours. At one point, I looked over at my ex and saw that her hair was standing straight up. And when she looked back at me, the widening of her eyes told me that mine was too. We had maybe half a second to realize what was happening, and then there was an explosion like someone had thrown a flash grenade right next to us. I looked out the passenger window and saw a streak of ionized air where the lightning had struck, close enough that it felt like I could have reached out and grabbed it. At the time, I described it as Zeus sitting around with his Greek god friends, spotting a couple of clueless mortals in the middle of a lightning storm, and deciding to throw a bolt just to see what would happen. That moment is what inspired my username. Story 19. My husband and I were renovating our house, and at the time we had no window coverings in the front room. The entire front room was gutted, with nothing in it except a ladder. In the middle of the night, my dogs started barking their warning bark, the kind that immediately tells you something is wrong. I got out of bed right away and carefully moved along the wall to look downstairs. When I peered around the corner into the front room, I saw someone looking through the large window with a flashlight. My dogs ran to the front door, barking aggressively. I went into one of the spare bedrooms that overlooked the front yard and saw a police car parked outside. What felt strange was that the officer never knocked or announced himself, which made me think they might be searching for someone. I grabbed my phone and called the local dispatch number to ask if officers had been sent to my area or if there was an active search, and they told me no. I thanked them and hung up. I wanted the officer outside to know that people lived in the house, even if it looked abandoned, but something felt very wrong, so I did not open the door. Instead, I turned the porch light on and off repeatedly to see how he would react. He immediately sprinted to his car and sped away. I still do not know what he was doing at my house or why he was looking through my windows, but I do know he broke protocol by not calling it in and by being there alone. I told my husband about it the next day, even though he had slept through the entire thing. He brushed it off and said it was just a police officer, but I know deep down that something about that night was not right. Story 20. My story starts in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I grew up in this state, and it has always had more than its fair share of strange and unsettling stories, from Roswell to Route 666, which has since been renamed. It would not be hard to find someone who has had some kind of encounter. Growing up, I lived with my mother and my babysitter in an area known as the South Valley, and the reasons for that arrangement and what followed could be a horror story all on its own. The babysitter lived there with her 2 adult children and 3 grandchildren. One of them was named Dustin, and he was a metalhead in every sense of the word, listening to bands like Iron Maiden and Metallica when they were still fresh on the scene. He dealt with bullying and fights constantly because of it, but he was not afraid of anything. I was about 10 or 11 at the time. We would regularly walk to nearby fast food places, and our route crossed over an old mud arroyo. You could either continue straight or walk along a dirt path beside the arroyo, which led behind a Burger King and past the landlord's house. Unless we really wanted Burger King, we avoided that route for 2 reasons. The landlord was always watching from his window, and there was a narrow irrigation bridge along the path that you had to cross carefully, 1 foot in front of the other, while holding onto a single rail, because slipping meant falling into the water. One night, around 9:40 in the evening, we decided to go because Dustin knew that going near closing time meant extra food. Since he was 7 years older than me, I trusted his judgment. We got our food, 2 bags each, and decided to take the shorter route back across the bridge. That night there was a blue moon, one of those full moons that makes everything glow, and Dustin crossed first, with me a few feet behind him. We heard something splash and he turned to check if it was me. I watched his face drain of color as he went into full panic mode and told me to run. He dropped the food and took off. The area was rough, so I assumed he had seen someone behind me who was about to rob us. I rushed forward, slipped into the water, recovered, and ran along the dirt path after him. When I reached the spot where he had been, I turned back and saw a bright white light hovering on the bridge. I knew it was not a bicycle or a flashlight because it was too steady and fast. That was when I dropped the food and ran as hard as I could. We made it back into the house. I dove onto the couch, and Dustin went straight to his room. About 10 minutes later, someone started pounding on the door. The oldest kid answered it, and the landlord was standing there in his underwear, furious. He accused Dustin of standing outside his bedroom window, holding a flashlight to illuminate himself while moaning and crying to scare him and his wife, saying he knew it was Dustin because the person had long hair. After the door closed, the oldest kid asked what we had done, and when I tried to explain, he just said it was the ditch witch, La Llorona, and that she had been after us. I did not sleep the rest of that night and never crossed that bridge again. Story 21. I have had several eerie experiences, some of them almost funny in hindsight. The first happened when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I walked into my bedroom around 7 in the evening, and it was already dark. I specifically remember going in there to play Banjo-Kazooie on the Nintendo 64. Just as I was about to flip on the light switch while entering the room, I heard my name whispered quickly. It sounded like it came from the upper left corner of my room. Nobody was home except my mom, who was in the basement, while I was on the second floor. I said hello, and this time I heard the voice again, closer, saying my name. It was clearly a woman's voice. I started to panic and asked who was there. And then right in front of me, the voice said my name one last time, firmly and clearly. At that point, I completely panicked and ran down the stairs screaming for my mom. I did not sleep in my bedroom for at least a year after that. The other strange experience happened when I was about 20 years old. I was in the basement talking out loud to myself, something I do often without realizing it. The basement was divided into 2 rooms. While I was talking, I heard a man's voice from the next room over say, very clearly, "Who are you talking to?" in a slightly disgusted tone, like it was mocking me. I assumed it was my dad and asked how long he had been down there, but I got no response. I asked again if he was done down there and opened the door to the next room, only to find no one there. I was completely alone in the house. My parents have also shared stories of hearing different voices in that house over the years. After we all moved out, none of us experienced anything like that again. My parents still mention the occasional odd moment, but I have not had anything truly strange happen in a long time. Story 22. This is one of my earliest eerie experiences that I still remember vividly, even though to this day I am both completely sure it happened and somehow unsure that it did at all. Many years ago, in the early to mid-1990s, when I was a preteen, we lived in a 3-bedroom house with a decent-sized yard, right in the middle of the largest residential suburb in our town. Power outages were common and could last for hours, so spending time outside under the stars was nothing unusual. One particular night during a blackout, myself, my older siblings, and an aunt and possibly an uncle, around 4 to 6 people total, were sitting outside at a large picnic table telling stories, drinking tea, and enjoying each other's company. What happened next felt like it lasted more than 30 seconds to me, but probably less than 3 seconds to everyone else. I was sitting on top of the table when I noticed everything around me begin to slow down. Everyone was still talking, but it was like slow motion, similar to watching a video at half speed or slower. I was not afraid, just confused and curious. I noticed the area starting to glow with faint colors, not bright but clearly visible. I looked down at my cup of tea and saw reflections of colorful lights in it. When I looked up, I saw multiple colorful lights hovering above us, coming from what looked like some kind of aircraft about the size of a science fiction spaceship. Hovering maybe 50 to 100 meters above us, there was no sound at all. It just hovered there, while everyone else continued moving in slow motion. I stared at it for about 3 seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing, and then suddenly everything snapped back to normal. I asked if anyone else had seen what I just saw, but no one reacted at all and just continued their conversations. Even though I am certain it happened, everyone's complete lack of reaction that night planted doubt in my mind that has never fully gone away. Story 23. This one is hard to share because I know how it sounds, but I am going to tell it anyway, since I have only ever told my closest friends. In the year 2010, there were 2 supermoons and 2 lunar eclipses in the same year. I was at the edge of the Puget Sound in Seattle at a place called Carkeek Park with a friend while waiting to see the second supermoon. There were a lot of people gathered in the upper parking lot, partying and waiting to watch the moon rise. But my friend and I went down to the beach for some quiet. I remember hearing people applaud as the moon rose behind us. Even though we could not see it yet from where we were, the water suddenly began forming strong, repeating waves after being almost completely still. The waves became intense enough that we had to stand and move back. Then I saw a huge golden light rising from the water far in the distance. I assumed it was the reflection of the moon and turned around to look at it directly, and it was so bright that I had to blink. When I turned back toward the water, what I thought were spots in my vision were actually 2 hovering, shimmering golden objects flying above us. They hovered, moved in figure-8 patterns, and then flew from right to left with sudden stops. People in the parking lot saw them too and started cheering and shouting jokes. Then the objects changed color from gold to red and back to gold together. They flew toward each other with great force and silently merged into a single brighter light. As the light intensified, the sound of the crowd faded, and I felt pressure building in my ears. I did not hear voices, but I was overwhelmed by a feeling of warmth and calm, like everything was going to be okay. And I felt an intense need to let go. I looked at my friend, then back at the light, and stared until it completely filled my vision. I felt almost meditative and remember hearing myself breathe out. What felt like an instant later, I came to standing on top of a picnic table in a different park nearly 2 miles away, while my friend begged me to get down. She told me that after the light appeared, I suddenly started acting childlike and speaking in a slightly different voice. She said the light faded, and I took off running down the beach laughing, climbing over rocks like a child set loose for the first time. She followed me for hours since she did not carry a phone, and mine was left in my car. At one point she yelled my name, and I stopped and told her very seriously that my name was not what she called me. Eventually I climbed onto the picnic table and danced with my arms raised before suddenly stopping and returning to normal, asking how we got there. She confirmed she saw the same objects I did and described everything the same way. Weeks later, I had a concussion in an unrelated accident and underwent extensive brain scans, which showed nothing abnormal. Whatever happened that night has never had an explanation. Story 24. A friend and I decided to go out for a late-night meal at a diner. We were both at home when one of us texted the other to see if they wanted to go eat. I ended up driving, picked my friend up, and we went to a diner in Fort Lee, New Jersey. We chose that diner because my friend knew someone who had worked there before. Unfortunately, we were both disappointed with the food, which was badly made by New Jersey diner standards, so neither of us finished our meals and we decided to head home. While driving, I got distracted by our conversation about how bad the food was and made a right turn too early, ending up on Route 4 instead of Route 46. Since we were in no rush, neither of us thought it was a big deal. I saw an exit for Grand Avenue, which is where we would normally go from Route 46, so I took it, but it did not take us where we expected. I thought that if we kept driving, we would eventually reach a part of Grand Avenue we recognized, but we quickly realized we were somewhere strange because we were suddenly driving through dense woods. This area of New Jersey is right outside New York City and is heavily developed, so this made no sense. As we drove, we saw an abandoned car off to the left that did not look old or damaged, which made us wonder why it had been left there. Then we saw a police car up ahead. I figured we could ask the officer for directions or at least find out where we were. But as we approached, we noticed the police car had all its lights on, and the driver's side door was open, with no one around. Things started to feel very wrong. The road curved ahead and the trees blocked our view, but I could see a red glow coming through them and assumed we were nearing civilization again. When we came out of the curve, I realized the red light was coming from the moon. This was no ordinary moon. It filled the entire sky and looked so close that every crater was clearly visible, and those craters appeared to be filled with blood, some overflowing into what looked like rivers of blood, like a volcano erupting blood. I drove in silence, convincing myself that my food must have been substanced or that I was having a mental breakdown. I decided I would not say anything, would drop my friend off, and then drive myself to the hospital. After several minutes of silence, my friend suddenly said that we were going to die. When I asked why, he said it was because the moon was covered in blood and was going to crash into the earth and kill us all. Hearing him say that gave me an overwhelming sense of relief because it meant I was not hallucinating alone. I told him why I had stayed silent, and we compared what we were seeing, pointing out the same details on the moon and realizing we were witnessing the same thing. Strangely, we both felt calm. I explained that it could not actually be the moon, because if it were truly that close, we would feel its gravitational effects, but we still agreed that death felt imminent. After some time, the road curved sharply again, and the trees blocked the sky, though the red glow continued shining through them. When we came out of the curve, the woods abruptly ended. I stopped the car and we looked back, and the bloody moon was completely gone. I wanted to turn around and go back into the woods, but my friend refused and demanded to be taken home. After dropping him off, I tried to retrace my route to find the woods again, but the exit to Grand Avenue no longer led anywhere like before. Over the next several days, I drove around and searched maps online, but I could not find anything even close to where we had been. We still talk about it and try to find meaning in it. My friend has been more open about what he saw, and people tend to think he is either crazy or overly religious, while I stayed mostly silent, knowing no one would believe me. Story 25. I was traveling in Peru with 3 other friends, and although I had heard about energy vortexes, I never really believed in that sort of thing until these experiences happened. Our first afternoon, we visited Moray, the Inca agricultural site with circular terraces, each level creating its own microclimate. Our driver dropped us off and casually told us to go to the bottom because some people said they felt energy there. I shrugged it off, but when we reached the lowest level, I jokingly suggested we hold hands to see if we felt anything. Within seconds, I felt a strong electrical sensation travel from my right foot up my leg, and my friend facing me said she felt the same thing in her left leg. Another afternoon, we visited Ollantaytambo, an Inca site built into the mountains, and our guide took us to the Inca baths. There was a smooth granite rock, squared off, with water flowing over the top and down the side. The guide stepped in, ran his finger across the rock, and the water stopped flowing, then ran his finger across it again, and the water resumed. I was speechless, and to this day, I have only found one reference to this happening online. At Machu Picchu, we walked up to the sundial, and I noticed people holding their hands close to the stone without touching it, trying to feel energy. I decided to try as well, and after a few seconds, I felt that same electrical sensation starting in my right middle finger and traveling up my arm. To this day, I do not know what to believe. I think vortexes exist, but you never know when or where you will experience them. Later, during a meditation hike in Utah, at a place believed to be a vortex, I began to feel like I was having an out-of-body experience. I panicked and forced myself to snap out of it, and it never happened again, either there or anywhere else I have traveled. Story 26. I am a paramedic, and elderly people often have wearable alarm systems that they can activate if they fall or need assistance. Sometimes we get called out for accidental activations and just have to do a welfare check. One morning, we received a call for an alarm activation and welfare check. We arrived at the house and found it in complete darkness, with all the windows covered and curtains shut. The house did not look lived in at all. There was no answer at the door, so we had to request the fire service to force entry. Once we gained access, we started searching for a patient. Upstairs, every room had all the furniture pushed into the middle, which was strange, so we went downstairs and continued searching. Eventually, we found a downstairs room that had been converted into a bedroom with a hospital bed and mobility aids. I found the alarm pendant neatly coiled on the bedside table, but there was still no sign of a patient. There were no apparent signs of life anywhere, and the house still did not look occupied. I went into the dining room and saw paperwork stacked neatly on the table, then moved into the kitchen to look for identification or contact details. In a drawer, I found funeral plan documents with a next of kin phone number. I called the next of kin, who told me the house belonged to their father and that he had died several months earlier. They said they were preparing to clear the house and sell it and assumed the alarm activation must have been accidental. They asked me to secure the house and said they would come by later. I asked the fire service to make the forced door as secure as possible, but they explained that because the lock had been drilled, it should not lock again, though they would do their best. As they tried to secure the door and pulled it closed, the handle shut and the door somehow locked itself. They could not open it again, and no one could explain how it had happened, as it should not have been possible. We all agreed it was strange, then left the property and completed our paperwork. What really topped it off was that night, while I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, I had what I believe was an episode of sleep paralysis, something I had never experienced before. I dreamed I was in the same house, viewing it from above, then entering one of the upstairs bedrooms. Suddenly, I was attacked from behind and beaten to death with an oxygen cylinder. I was aware the entire time that I was in my own bedroom, but I could not move and experienced it like an out-of-body event. It was absolutely terrifying and has never happened again. This was about 5 years ago. Story 27. When I was between 8 and 10 years old, my family of 6 lived in an apartment that was part of a complex of 4 units, but ours was isolated because it was built above all the garages. There were only 2 entry points, the front and back doors, and each had 2 doors with 2 locks each. I was the youngest, and my brother was 2 grades above me, so we were often home alone after school while my parents were at work, and our other 2 siblings were at their high school. It became a regular occurrence to hear dining table chairs being dragged across the floor, or the sound of plates and cutlery moving as if someone was arranging them, or kitchen cabinets and drawers opening and closing. Every time my brother and I would check, and nothing would be out of place. We did not share any walls with other apartments, so it could not have been neighbors. It happened so often that we eventually got used to it. Another recurring thing in that same apartment happened at night, when I would see a hand on the wall near the door, as if someone was standing in the hallway and sliding their hand into the room while hugging the wall. The hand would stop at the light switch, so all I could see was the hand gripping the switch and part of the arm leading back toward the door, where I assumed the rest of the body was in the hallway. I remember the hand had long, pale gray fingers with no nails, not missing nails, but as if they had never existed at all, almost alien-looking. It was not a trick of the light, because the bedroom I shared with my brother faced the street, and being on the second floor, a lamppost outside shone into the room like a soft nightlight, bright enough to see clearly, but not enough to disturb sleep. The hand would just stay there, lightly tapping or moving up and down for hours, and then it would slowly pull back out and disappear without any sound or footsteps. I was always smart enough to never try to see what it belonged to, so I stayed in bed every time. Story 28. When I was 18, I was doing youth volunteer work abroad in Germany with a Christian organization that was hosting an inter-school sports tournament. I am not religious, but I knew the people running it and wanted to help out at the time. On the drive to the airport, I got a call from my family, who had gathered together after learning that my grandfather had passed away. They asked if I wanted to turn back or continue, even though I was already many hours from home. My family urged me to continue, saying he would never want someone to miss out on a new story to tell, so I went on despite desperately wanting to go home. I was a mess because he was the only true male role model I had in my life. Halfway through the trip, I was sitting alone in a corner of a dining hall, watching a friend play guitar and sing to the kids at the tournament. More kids arrived and joined in singing, while I stayed seated by myself, and I began to feel an increasing sensation that I was being watched or that someone else was there with me. I kept looking around and saw nothing out of the ordinary, until I finally looked over my shoulder to the next table about 15 feet away and saw, as clearly as I have ever seen anything, my grandfather. He was sitting there watching everyone sing, smiling joyfully, completely at peace, with 3 other figures sitting around him. The other figures looked like bright, glowing light with no discernible features. I did what any non-religious person might do in that situation and ran. I left the hall as fast as I could and bolted to the farthest part of the compound, away from the crowds, dimly lit and out of sight, where I collapsed onto a bench and cried uncontrollably. I put my head in my hands, and the moment I closed my eyes, it felt like I could see him standing right next to me, just his legs, and I felt a firm pressure on my shoulder, like a reassuring hand. I calmed down almost instantly and stopped crying. I sat there with my head in my hands, feeling his presence for what felt like a very long time. I did not want him to leave, and I believe that was the last time I ever saw him. I am not spiritual or religious, and I usually do not believe in ghost stories, but I know what I saw, and I miss him deeply. Story 29. I was house sitting for a friend while he and his wife were out of town for a week, and I had been coming and going from the house without any issues. On the day he was scheduled to return, I experienced something I have never forgotten. The night before, I stopped by the house to bring in the mail and newspaper, and as I was leaving, a storm started brewing, so I borrowed his umbrella to take with me. The next morning on my way to work, I went back to return the umbrella, since he was the type of person who would definitely notice if it was missing. As I climbed the stairs leading up to the walkway to his house, an overwhelming wave of fear hit me the moment I reached the top. I felt nauseous and completely convinced that going any further was a terrible mistake. I forced myself to walk up to the front door, but I could not bring myself to unlock it or step inside. I eventually went back to my car and drove to work, laughing it off as silliness, but also feeling embarrassed. Later that afternoon, my friend called me and said he needed to talk. I immediately assumed it was about the umbrella and told him I had it, but that did not seem to register with him. He asked if I had noticed anything unusual while house sitting, and shortly after, I spoke briefly with a police officer who asked the same question. I had not noticed anything. It turned out that sometime between when I borrowed the umbrella and when I returned the next morning, someone had broken into the house through the sliding glass door in the back. I believe they were already gone by the time I arrived, but something must have registered in my mind that morning, even if I did not consciously recognize it.